The case of Jolene Cummings. The disappearance of 33-year-old Jolene Cummings shocked even experienced detectives. Jolene, a mother of 3, lived in Fernandina Beach and was in the process of divorcing her husband, Jason. While Jolene and the children resided in their Fernandina Beach home, Jason had moved to a neighboring city and had weekend visitations with the kids. Jolene worked as a hairdresser at Tangle's Hair Salon. On Saturday, May 12, 2018, Jolene worked until 5 p.m. The following day, Mother's Day, was also her 34th birthday. Her children had spent the previous days with their father. As agreed, Jolene was supposed to meet Jason on Sunday in Hilliard at the Winn-Dixie supermarket parking lot to pick up the children. Jason brought the children, but Jolene failed to appear. All attempts to reach her by phone were unsuccessful. Her mother, and Johnson, who wished to call Jolene to wish her a happy birthday, was also unable to get in contact, as all calls went straight to voicemail. After repeated attempts to reach Jolene failed, Jason contacted and to inquire about the children. Upon learning that Jolene had not picked up the kids, and became concerned, as this behavior was uncharacteristic of her daughter. When and was still unable to reach Jolene on Monday, May 14th, she filed a missing person report with the police. Authorities promptly launched an investigation, releasing a poster with Jolene's photo and issuing an all-points bulletin for her 2006 Ford Expedition. And Johnson made a public plea for help in finding her daughter, urging anyone with information to come forward. Jolene's disappearance was devastating for Anne, and she begged anyone with knowledge to report it. On the same day, police and volunteers searched the forest near Jolene's home, but their efforts were unsuccessful. The salon where Jolene worked was closed on Sunday and Monday. Police discovered that Jolene was last seen on Saturday, May 12th, when she left work. According to the salon's owner, Jolene and Jennifer, another hairdresser, were scheduled to work together that day. In a phone call, Jennifer told her boss that she and Jolene had closed the salon at 5 p.m. and each had driven away in their own cars. Police determined that Jolene last used her phone to make an outgoing call while still at work on May 12th. Nassau County Sheriff Bill Leeper appealed to anyone who was a customer of Tangle's Hair Salon or in the area on May 12th to contact the police. Jolene's relatives and friends did not believe she had left voluntarily. The salon owner, where Jolene had worked for 6 years, shared their skepticism. It was difficult for them to believe she would abandon her children. Police were determined to uncover at least one lead, so they investigated Jolene's personal life. Since spouses often become hostile during divorce and child custody disputes, they took a closer look at Jason. Meanwhile, detectives discovered that just 5 days before Jolene vanished, a neighbor had reported a loud argument to the police. It emerged that Jolene had been fighting with her ex-boyfriend, Jason G., and their children had witnessed the altercation. He had asked Jolene if he could stay with her for a while, but she refused. Enraged, he began vandalizing everything in sight. The reason for her refusal was that police were actively searching for Jason due to parole violations. By the time the police arrived, Jason had fled the scene. After Jolene disappeared, Jason G. became a person of interest in the police investigation. 2 days into the investigation, on May 15, 2018, police found Jason G. hiding in Jolene's house, where he had been since the day her neighbor reported the loud quarrel. He was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. During the interview, Jason G. claimed he was not involved in Jolene's disappearance. Meanwhile, police discovered their first crucial lead. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Jolene Cummings's SUV was found parked outside a Home Depot hardware store, just a few miles from her workplace. The vehicle remained undamaged and displayed no indications of a struggle. On May 15th, the police visited the salon where Jolene worked, as it was the first day back after a 2-day break. They arrived at 10 a.m. to speak with Jennifer Seibert, an employee who claimed to be the last person to see Jolene and to have closed the salon with her before the weekend. However, Jennifer failed to appear for work, citing an urgent matter in another city. CCTV footage provided key evidence regarding Jolene's disappearance. The footage showed Jolene's car entering the parking lot of a hardware store, where the police later located it. Notably, Jennifer Seibert had stated that she and Jolene closed the salon at 5 p.m. on May 12th, but the CCTV footage indicated Jolene's car arriving at the hardware store at 1:17 a.m. on May 13th, a time difference of 8 hours and 17 minutes. Jennifer visited a gas station across the street from her location. Surveillance footage from the station showed her entering the premises, buying a bottle of water, and asking an employee to call a taxi for her, which later took her to her workplace, the salon. The gas station employee informed the police that Jennifer appeared agitated and had fresh facial abrasions. As a result, Jennifer Seibert became the lead suspect in the investigation, and the police initiated a search for her. Upon verifying the address she provided when applying for her job, detectives found it was fictitious. Jennifer attempted to avoid capture, but her efforts failed. On May 16th, patrol officers spotted a black Kia Soul belonging to Jennifer parked in a recreation area between two trucks, roughly 50 meters from her salon. Upon approaching the vehicle, the officers discovered Jennifer asleep inside. They arrested her and initially charged her with stealing Jolene Cummings' car. When taken to the station, detectives noticed abrasions on her hands and face and asked her to explain their origin. She claimed she had been bitten by bed bugs. Police discovered that she did not have a permanent residence, mostly sleeping in her car and using showers at a fitness center. Following her arrest, investigators uncovered a surprising fact. Jennifer Seibert was not her real name. Her true identity was Kimberly Kessler, born in 1968, and she had been reported missing in Pennsylvania in 2012. The name Jennifer Marie Seibert belonged to a 13-year-old girl who died in a car accident in Germany in 1987 and was buried in Butler Cemetery, Pennsylvania. During a videotaped interview 48 hours later, Kimberly Kessler, seated on a couch and wearing an orange jumpsuit, calmly disclosed her real identity. "I'm 50 years old, and I've been on the run for over 25 years." The police investigation revealed more about Kimberly Kessler's history. It emerged that she had started using other people's names in 1996 while living in Pennsylvania. Since then, Kessler had employed at least 18 aliases and lived in 33 cities across 14 states. Many of these names were similar, and she had taken at least half from gravestones and cemeteries, later acquiring fake documents to support these identities. One of the names she used was Jennifer Seibert. In 2012, Connie Kessler, Kimberly's mother, contacted the police to report her daughter missing, despite not having heard from her since 2004. The delay of 8 years in reporting her daughter's disappearance indicates strained family relationships. Pennsylvania police investigated Kimberly Kessler's disappearance and concluded that she was voluntarily missing, though the reasoning for this finding remains unclear. It is unknown whether further investigation occurred. Had the police located her earlier, they likely would have discovered she had assumed another person's identity. Numerous questions remain unanswered. Why did Kessler flee, and why did she use multiple aliases? According to Connie Kessler, her daughter faced numerous difficulties, including an abusive relationship with a man in 2004. Kimberly gave birth to a son, Evan, but when the relationship ended, the father took custody and prevented Kimberly from seeing her child. The father later moved to another state and falsely told Kimberly that their 1-year-old son had died. Kimberly attempted to discover the truth and locate her son's grave. Frustrated by the lack of answers, she began searching for Evan and investigating his whereabouts. Connie Kessler theorizes that her daughter used aliases to hide her identity, fearing Evan's father. According to Tim Edwards, Evan's father, the circumstances were different. He asserts that he had a relationship with Melissa McKernan between 1997 and 1999, resulting in the birth of their son, Evan. Melissa allegedly used false names to prevent her family, including her mother, from locating her. After the couple separated, Melissa retained custody of Evan and denied Tim visitation rights. In 1999, when Evan was approximately 15 months old, social services intervened, removing Evan from Melissa, who then fled the city, disappearing from Tim's life. Tim never informed Kimberly that Evan had passed away since he lost contact with Melissa after she left and never heard from her again. Later, when Jolene disappeared, Evan was 20 years old and had never seen a photo of his biological mother until FBI agents visited their home in 2018 to gather information on Kimberly Kessler's past. However, there are inconsistencies in these accounts. According to Tim Edwards' birth certificate, Evan was born in 1998, whereas in her interview, Connie Kessler claimed Kimberly gave birth to Evan in 2004. This discrepancy indicates that Connie Kessler was not well informed about her daughter's life, and her statement regarding Tim hiding Evan from his mother may not be reliable. Consequently, Connie's theory that her daughter used the identities of deceased individuals to locate her son and avoid detection by his father is questionable. Moreover, Kimberly was unable to provide coherent explanations to detectives as to why she needed to use multiple names. Returning to the Jolene Cummings case, after discovering that Kimberly Kessler had been living under assumed identities, the police charged her with forgery. A storage unit rented by Kessler was searched, yielding several significant items, including 4 wigs, a bag containing 2 severed hair tails, and 3 mobile phones. However, the most crucial piece of evidence was the discovery of Jolene Cummings' DNA on Kessler's sock and shoe. Additionally, during a search of Kessler's vehicle, police found scissors with Jolene's DNA on them. Notably, the blue plastic containers found at the scene would prove important later. The phone seized from Kessler revealed a disturbing search history. It suggested that what happened to Jolene Cummings was not accidental, but rather something Kessler had been planning. On April 30th, 2018, at 3:36 a.m., Kessler searched for information about a man charged with murder after his coworkers' remains were discovered in his yard. This was followed by a search on May 8th at 1:37 a.m. for cases in which a coworker was convicted of murder, but the body was never recovered. Later that day, at 7:13 a.m., Kessler searched for advice on injecting and how to use a tourniquet. She also searched for a list of female murderers by country on a website called Murderpedia, as well as a list of female murderers in Florida. Finally, she looked up information on autopsy and postmortem changes at 6:33 p.m. The owner of the hair salon where Jolene worked reported that the plant in the pot inside the salon had been replaced. This draws attention to Kessler's search activity on May 13th, the day Jolene failed to pick up her children. At 12:05 p.m., Kessler searched for indoor palm and then variation palm tree. A minute later, at 12:06 p.m., the police reviewed CCTV footage from a hypermarket selling household goods, located a few hundred yards from the Tangles hair salon. The footage showed Kessler arriving at the hypermarket on May 14th at 2:39 p.m. and leaving the store half an hour later with a plant, which later appeared at the hair salon on May 15th at 6:13 p.m. 2 days later, on May 16th at 6:27 p.m., Kessler searched online for Jolene Cummings. "I have vanished, and no body, no crime." Forensic experts used luminol and ultraviolet light to examine the hair salon, and their findings suggested that a serious crime had occurred there. The entire room glowed under the ultraviolet light, indicating the presence of blood or other bodily fluids. On May 22nd, the sheriff held a press conference during which he stated, "We have gathered sufficient evidence, although some of it will remain undisclosed for now to protect the ongoing investigation. Sadly, our evidence leads us to conclude that Jolene Cummings has likely died." Investigators learned that about a week before her disappearance, Jolene shared her suspicions with a colleague at the Tangles salon. She believed their new hairdresser, Jennifer, was hiding something and was not being genuine. According to some salon clients, the relationship between Jolene and Jennifer was tense. One client even witnessed a heated argument between the two women on May 9th, just 3 days before Jolene vanished. The Tangle Hair Salon closed its doors on June 5, 2018. Despite Kessler's attorneys managing to keep some evidence from the public, the police released information that shed light on what happened to Jolene Cummings. However, a surveillance camera near the back of the building captured footage of the dumpster. Kessler was seen there at least 4 times. The recordings show Kessler doing something near the dumpster. Later, at 8 a.m., she returned to dispose of a white garbage bag. Based on how she lifted the bag, it appeared to be quite heavy. 14 minutes later, she threw out another white bag. In the 4th recording, taken an hour before midnight, Kessler is seen lifting a waste container to empty its contents, suggesting it contained something heavy. The Walmart camera footage provides insight into what Kessler discarded. The recording shows her purchasing items at the self-checkout, including garbage bags, cleaning agents, latex gloves, and notably, an electric knife. This discovery significantly influenced the police's subsequent actions. In July 2018, investigators learned that a local waste management company had been dumping trash in a Georgia landfill. A team of nearly 200 people combed through the landfill for a week, yielding several important leads. Although the sheriff refused to disclose them to preserve the integrity of the investigation, police recovered items near the dumpster where Kessler had discarded the white garbage bags. Authorities recovered a piece of jewelry, women's shoes, and a blue plastic container. Notably, the container matched one found in Kessler's storage unit and tested positive for Jolene Cummings's DNA. While Jolene's body remained missing, the accumulated evidence was sufficient to charge Kessler with her murder. On January 17, 2019, Kimberly Kessler made her first court appearance, entering a not guilty plea. However, the trial was delayed for several years due to the judge's concerns about Kessler's mental stability. During this period, Kessler went on a hunger strike, reducing her weight to under 88 pounds. Her court appearances were often marked by outbursts of anger. Before the 2021 court session, Kessler underwent compulsory treatment, which ultimately deemed her fit to stand trial. On December 9, 2021, the jury delivered a guilty verdict. On January 27, 2022, Kessler was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The prosecution believes Kessler's motive was to silence Jolene Cummings, who threatened to expose her lies during a press conference. Sheriff Leeper expressed satisfaction with the verdict, stating that Kessler would spend the remainder of her life in Florida State Prison. Unfortunately, Jolene Cummings was never found. Moving on to the next case. The case of Marta Russo. The Marta Russo case not only stunned Italy in the late 1990s, but also came to represent a symbol of unresolved mysteries in the history of criminal justice. The abrupt death of a promising young woman on the campus of Sapienza University, which is regarded as a symbol of intellectualism and enlightenment, left society as a whole in a state of shock. Behind that tragic event, the doubts, controversies, and the obscure motives of those accused formed a story that was both heartbreaking and mysterious. Today's story will demonstrate how negligence can lead to devastating consequences once an investigation begins. Typically, such circumstances tend to complicate an investigation. Unfortunately, some detectives manipulate these circumstances to fit their own narrative. This can lead to a controversial case like the one we will discuss today, which still has many unanswered questions. Marta Russo, born in 1975, was described as intelligent, energetic, and full of promise. At the time of the events, Marta had just turned 22 in March. She was a young and attractive law student at the prestigious University of La Sapienza in Rome. Fulfilling her long-held dream of attending this historic institution, Marta had ambitious plans for her future and aspired to become a lawyer. Before reaching that goal, she needed to complete her degree. She was known to be compassionate and sociable, always willing to help others. She had even expressed her desire to donate her organs in the event of her death. On the morning of May 9, 1997, she was having a normal day, walking across the university campus with her friend Rosanna Capone, moving between the buildings of the University of Statistics, Politics, and Law. They were carrying textbooks and notebooks while talking about their upcoming exams. There were no indications that anything unusual was about to happen. Suddenly, at 11:42, Rosanna heard a strange clicking noise and Marta collapsed to the ground unconscious. Rosanna thought it might have been a weapon, but she was not certain. Several witnesses who saw Marta fall rushed over to help. However, other passers-by disagreed with Rosanna's belief that Marta had been attacked violently. They listened to Rosanna, but believed she was mistaken, as the possibility of a violent assault at such a time and place seemed too improbable. All doubts were quickly resolved when a pool of blood began to form beneath Marta's head. Who would attack a defenseless student in the middle of the day on a university campus crowded with people? It seemed unbelievable. Marta had been injured, and a small bullet hole was found in her left ear, showing that the bullet had entered her brain. Bystanders immediately called for an ambulance, which arrived to evaluate her condition. Marta was alive but in critical condition and needed to be rushed to the hospital. Once at the clinic, she slipped into a coma. Her brain function stopped, but life support was maintained in the hope that she might recover. Her parents prayed for her safety and hoped she would regain consciousness. Meanwhile, doctors understood that her chances of recovery were almost non-existent. Even if Marta were to wake up, there was an almost certain possibility that she would be confined to a wheelchair for the rest of her life. At the same time, forensic experts were working at the crime scene. It was an open area connecting two university buildings. Along the sides of the passage, there was a building facade with windows and opposite it, a blank wall with a few sparse trees. Detectives needed to determine the attacker's position at the moment of the incident. Marta's friend could not identify where the sound had come from. It was very quiet, and Rosanna was the only witness who heard the sound of the attack. Another difficulty arose because Marta's body had been moved several times during attempts to help her. This made it hard for detectives to establish her exact position when she was attacked, in order to locate the criminal. To understand who could even think of shooting an ordinary student, the police began investigating Marta's background. Investigators believed that she might have been in contact with a criminal or even involved in wrongdoing. But the investigation showed that the victim was an ordinary, kind girl, and examining her biography did not reveal any potential suspects. Her friends were also typical students, and she had not been in a relationship recently. She spent all her free time studying. Even her diary entries were reviewed, but they contained nothing suspicious. Investigators began to suspect that the killer's real target had been Rosanna. Marta simply happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and was killed by accident. The police had gathered some notable information. In the days leading up to the murder, Rosanna received 45 anonymous phone calls, which was highly unusual. When she answered one of the calls, there was only silence on the other end, and she gained no information. In addition, an unknown man called Rosanna's father late at night, leading to a heated argument in which he insulted her but never disclosed his identity. With this information, the police began to believe that the attacker had intended to kill Rosanna but mistakenly killed Marta instead. They considered the possibility that the attack was a failed act of revenge against Rosanna's father. He was an influential official who supervised several prisons. Investigators thought that the murder of his daughter could have been the work of a former inmate. However, detectives examined these theories and ultimately found them unconvincing. While Rosanna's father may have had enemies, there was no evidence suggesting a motive for harming his family members. Another hypothesis was then proposed. The university, in addition to its prestige, had always carried a bad reputation. There had been numerous uprisings and spontaneous attacks on campus. Such incidents do occur with alarming frequency. This university had even been the site of a terrorist attack on February 12, 1980. Unknown assailants rioted in the lobby with a weapon in one of the academic buildings while a professor was present. He was attacked 7 times and died as a result. This assault was not an isolated event. It took place during a period of heightened political tension, with similar incidents connected to the so-called Red Brigades. On March 27, 1985, a university economics professor became the victim of unknown criminals in another attack. The Red Brigades claimed responsibility for these crimes, stating that such actions were part of their political struggle. However, the murder of Marta, and even the possible targeting of Rosanna in 1997, appeared to be senseless acts of violence in this context. Another detail supporting this theory is the coincidence that May 9th marked the anniversary of the discovery of the body of Aldo Moro, a prominent political figure. It is believed that on this occasion, the Red Brigades chose to launch a new armed attack. In earlier incidents, the Red Brigades had openly admitted responsibility for the crimes they committed. Yet this time, no one claimed responsibility for the attack on Marta Russo. This was illogical, as it would have made more political sense to target a university professor rather than an ordinary student. As police continued their investigation, doctors were trying to save Marta. A surgeon removed a .22 caliber bullet from her head, which was then sent to the laboratory for analysis. At this stage, ballistics experts believed that the faint sound heard was likely caused either by the use of a silencer or by weapons that naturally produce quieter sounds, especially from a distance, making them difficult to identify. The .22 caliber was a common choice because it has low stopping power and produces significantly less noise than higher caliber firearms. Forensic experts worked to reconstruct the bullet's trajectory to help determine possible shooting locations. However, because the body had been moved, their conclusions were ultimately insufficient and likely inaccurate. The investigation suggested that the attacker most likely acted from a building across the street from where the victim had been walking. It was assumed that the attacker fired from a window. Calculations indicated that the shooter was positioned in a bathroom adjacent to classrooms where statistics students were studying. Given the small number of students present at that time, this location allowed the attacker to remain unnoticed and escape without attracting attention. The day after the attack, This theory was reinforced by a statement from a statistics student who reported visiting the bathroom shortly after the incident. He noticed that the window was wide open, even though it was usually kept closed. Detectives concentrated their efforts on the area, including the street below the window. They soon located a shell casing from the weapon, which had been missed on the first day because it was hidden beneath a car. To the surprise of ballistic experts, the casing did not match the bullet that killed Marta. Investigators also found numerous bullet holes in the wall near the crime scene. It appeared that students had been using the restroom as a target practice area. Someone had been practicing there frequently. A cartridge case discovered at the scene may have come from these training sessions. While examining the bathroom, police also discovered a small nearby room used as a storage area by a cleaning company that worked at the university. Based on the bullet's trajectory, detectives considered this room a possible location from which the attacker fired. Access to this room was initially restricted. Investigators conducted thorough background checks on all cleaning company employees associated with the university. They found that many of these employees were weapon enthusiasts with licenses. Some of them were able to obtain weapons even without a license. In addition, the storage room contained a significant quantity of ammunition. Investigators uncovered various types of weapons and equipment, including silencers. They also found several kinds of bullets, including .22 caliber cartridges. It was notable that the cleaning company employees were free from cleaning duties between 9 and 14 o'clock, meaning no one should have been present at that time. The attack on Marta occurred at 11:42 a.m., which fell within this period. Investigators needed to question all the cleaners, but they provided alibis in an effort to remove suspicion. Eventually, all employee information was verified. During the investigation, no illegal firearm storage was found, as the owners had proper licenses and the weapons were registered. The cleaning staff admitted that they occasionally used the wall of a nearby building as a weapons practice range, but they insisted that they always practiced from a trailer and were careful when no one was around. This situation raised additional questions. On May 14th, the equipment keeping Marta alive was switched off, and she was pronounced dead. She had remained in a coma for 5 days without regaining consciousness. Her parents and sister honored her final wish by donating her organs. Around 10,000 people attended Marta's funeral, including relatives, friends, students, and local residents who wanted to pay tribute to her. Marta's mother revealed that she felt a strong sense of anxiety on the morning of the tragedy, which she found impossible to shake. At first, she did not attach much importance to her uneasiness until the police contacted her regarding Marta's situation. Public dissatisfaction with the police was growing due to a series of high-profile cases that had remained unsolved. These failures seriously damaged the reputation of the police in Rome. As a result, it became urgently necessary to restore their lost credibility. This prompted decisive actions by the police, which had devastating consequences. The investigation began when detectives questioned the librarian, a 36-year-old man who owned a suppressor and a .22 caliber weapon. Initially, he was considered a suspect, but he had a strong alibi. He was present in the audience during the attack, and numerous witnesses confirmed his presence. As a result, he was cleared of suspicion. Detectives then enlisted leading forensic experts to search the building for microscopic gunpowder particles. They carefully examined windowsills, floors, and various surfaces to determine the location from which the attacker had fired. Unfortunately, a significant amount of time had passed since the incident, and the area had been cleaned several times. In addition, rain the following day may have washed away any evidence on the exterior of the building. Investigators searched several floors, and after approximately 3 hours, they discovered 2 tiny particles of barium and antimony, which are associated with firearms. However, these particles were not found on the restroom windowsills, but on the floor above, in office number 6, rather than in the restroom area. In office number 6, a stain on the windowsill was suspected to be gunpowder, but this was uncertain because many people working in the building owned weapons. As a result, it was difficult to determine who could have left the trace. Despite these doubts, the stain was considered reliable evidence. The chemical composition of the substance was analyzed and revealed similarities to printer ink or burnt rubber. Investigators focused on office number 6, which was considered a probable location for the attack. Based on the possible trajectory calculations, the shot could have originated from almost anywhere along the campus facade, including the roof. Nevertheless, the police identified the individuals who were in that room at the time of the attack. The office was used for departmental assistance, and both students and faculty had access to it. All individuals present were questioned. During the investigation, detectives noticed a strange pattern. Each person claimed they were not in room number 6 at the time of the murder. Investigators suspected this behavior indicated collusion among those involved. While searching office number 6, they found a mobile phone that had made a call at 11:44 on the day of the incident, just minutes after the attack. The call was traced to a professor's daughter named Maria Chiara Lepori. She admitted that she was in the room when the call was made, but stated that she did not see anyone with a weapon. She firmly denied any involvement in the murder, explaining that she did not know Marta, had no motive, and did not possess a weapon of the specified caliber. At this stage, police officers were determined to thoroughly investigate the circumstances surrounding office number 6. They decided to question Maria at the police station. During these interrogations, Maria appeared disoriented and altered her account several times. She was questioned 13 times, and in nearly every session she introduced new details. Afterward, she stated that investigators were putting pressure on her. Eventually, she remembered that when she returned to office number 6 to make a phone call, a man had come out to meet her. He muttered something unclear, like hello, but Maria did not recognize him and simply watched as he walked away. However, her version of events changed yet again. Maria had a confirmed alibi, which ultimately shielded her from being formally accused. She explained her behavior as a result of fear and intense stress, and she was ultimately removed from the list of suspects. Unfortunately, Maria's difficulties were only beginning. One of the suspects was a man named Salvatore Ferraro, who turned out to be an assistant in philosophy and law. Maria identified him, and he quickly began cooperating with the police. She felt compelled to do so under the threat of being charged herself. According to her, he resembled the young man who had left office number 6 when she entered, but she remained unsure until the very end. Her account changed repeatedly, likely because of the continuous pressure placed on her. The first interrogation lasted 14 hours, after which investigators continued to approach her again and again, increasing the pressure. It is uncertain whether Maria can be considered a reliable source, but the detectives were determined to find the killer at any cost. To confirm her statements, they carried out numerous interrogations with other individuals connected to office number 6. These witnesses gave inconsistent testimonies that did not match each other. In response, investigators worked intensely to assemble the information into a coherent picture. At one point, Bruno Romano, the university director, intervened. She voiced her dissatisfaction with how the police were handling the case and highlighted several violations she had noticed. Her primary concern was that the investigation did not allow lawyers to be present during witness interviews. Because of her objections, the director herself became a suspect and was placed under investigation for allegedly covering up for the killer in order to protect the university from scandal. Under mounting public pressure, the police attempted to identify a suspect, but everyone they considered had solid alibis. Attention then shifted to Gabriella Aletto, the secretary of the university head. Maria claimed that Gabriella had been in office number 6 before the attack. Police began exerting intense pressure on Gabriella, even threatening her. At the same time, they installed wiretaps on the phone in the office where she worked, and there were even plans to place a hidden camera. During her interactions with investigators, Gabriella faced explicit threats. She was warned that if she did not identify the murderer, she would be accused of the crime herself. On the 45th day after the incident, Gabriella, seeking to protect her career and personal life, stated that she had been far from office number 6 and had no knowledge of who could be responsible for the murder. She stressed that a long-term illness prevented her from using weapons. The detectives were so determined to close the case that they even summoned doctors to verify her medical condition. They interrogated Gabriella relentlessly, including questioning her son-in-law, who worked in law enforcement, to pressure her into confessing. Despite being a relative, he took part in efforts to force a confession. The other detectives eventually left, leaving Gabriella alone with her son-in-law. Despite the circumstances, he was unable to obtain a confession from her. The only admission she made was that she had been in office number 6. The lack of lawyers further complicated the situation, pushing Gabriella into despair. In addition, on June 11th, authorities decided to arrest director Bruno Romano, charging him with aiding and abetting the murderer, as it was suspected that he was covering up the crime. Later, when criminal cases were initiated against all participants in the investigation for abuse of office, the prosecutor maintained that this was merely a tactic to intimidate those involved. Gabriella, feeling the pressure of the intimidation, especially after the arrest of the director, lost her composure out of fear. Eventually, she disclosed that on the day of the murder, she saw two men in office number 6. One of them pulled out a weapon when Marta Russo and her friend were positioned between the window and the opposite wall. He fired, causing Marta to collapse. Gabriella also remembered that the young men appeared panicked and clearly did not expect to kill anyone as they fled in fear. Witnesses identified the shooter as Salvatore Ferraro. The second man was identified as Giovanni Scattoni, a 29-year-old philosophy assistant. After obtaining these statements, detectives were able to piece together the information. At first, the young men did not seem like individuals capable of committing a cold-blooded murder. Even unintentionally, investigators were not concerned by the fact that Salvatore and Giovanni did not know Marta and had no motive. They repeatedly denied their guilt, but Gabriella's statement made it difficult to dismiss the accusations. A major issue for Salvatore emerged from searches of his apartment, where forensic books about the perfect crime were found. Investigators quickly assumed this meant he had been planning an ideal murder. Although Salvatore argued that he required this material for his university research, investigators countered that forensic science is not normally a field of study for philosophers. However, there was a serious problem. Detectives had been unable to locate the weapon that killed Marta. During the trial, both Salvatore and Giovanni remained calm and continued to claim their innocence. There was no direct evidence connecting them to the crime, yet the prosecution portrayed them as ruthless killers. Although the prosecution presented testimony from Gabriella, the jury remained uncertain. They focused on the traces of gunpowder allegedly found on the windowsill of office number 6 and the bullet's trajectory, overlooking the fact that this evidence was largely inaccurate and speculative. Witnesses who had endured lengthy interrogations testified, and trial photographs clearly showed that Gabriella and Maria struggled to hide their fear. This situation mirrored the experience of a security guard who had seen the defendants in office number 6. He had been a suspect in the case, but chose to cooperate with the police and was later cleared of suspicion. During the trial, Gabriella described how the defendants ran from the university after the attack, but this did not prove their involvement in the crime. Defense attorneys for the students argued that the particles found on the windowsill were not from a weapon, but instead from car exhaust. This suggested that the attack could have originated from another window, potentially implicating different individuals. The lawyer maintained that the witness testimonies had been exaggerated. Experts, based on their reconstruction of the events, believed that Marta's death was the result of a tragic accident during a reckless game. The shooting happened unintentionally due to a series of ricochets that struck her head, which would categorize the act as manslaughter. By the conclusion of the trial in 2001, both defendants were found guilty. Giovanni received a reduced sentence of 5 years for manslaughter and unlawful possession of firearms, having originally been sentenced to 7 years. Salvatore was implicated in the torture of women, but all charges against him were dropped by university authorities. Following their convictions, the defendants appealed their sentences, which led to a review of the case. The Supreme Court upheld Giovanni's manslaughter conviction, but overturned the charge of illegal firearm possession. As a result, Giovanni's prison term was reduced to 5 years, and he was ordered to pay €300,000 in legal expenses. This case continues to raise many questions, as uncertainty remains regarding the guilt of Giovanni and Salvatore, making it a highly controversial matter. However, some supporters believe that justice was ultimately served. Victims of police misconduct later spoke out, voicing their dissatisfaction, which triggered significant public outrage and internal investigations. Their statements were supported by strong evidence, including several interrogation recordings that contained threats. These victims shared their concerns with investigators. Gabriella stated that she felt intimidated and unsafe, and she emphasized the absence of legal representation during interrogations. Taking such action was risky, as it was believed that the police might receive institutional support. As a result, their appeal prompted a new investigation. Unfortunately, it ended quickly, with no police officers facing any consequences. Gabriella and Maria have long since been free, and are continuing with their lives. Gabriella, now over 50, is a philosophy teacher in Rome who has had to turn down several opportunities and continues to face criticism. Salvatore Ferrero works as a lawyer, writes books, appears on television programs, and assists people who have suffered from injustice and cruelty. The most disturbing aspect of the case is that if there was indeed a miscarriage of justice, Marta's true killer remains at large. To ease some of the pain caused by this tragedy, an exception was made for Marta's family. Marta's mother was allowed to embrace the woman who has lived for 20 years thanks to Marta's donated heart. She is grateful for this gift, acknowledging that through this generous act, a part of Marta continues to live on in others. Moving on to the next case. The case of Robert Pointer. Robert Pointer was recognized as a kind man who helped others when they were in need. His children were always his foremost priority. Robert had 3 daughters, with Grace being the youngest from his second marriage. From his first marriage, he had 2 daughters, his eldest, Nicole, and his second daughter, Natalie. After roughly 20 years of marriage to Robert, Amy Pointer began noticing changes in his behavior that made her suspicious. Robert started leaving the house more frequently and spending increased time away from his family. Their eldest daughter, Nicole, soon discovered that her father possessed a second cell phone. It was revealed that he was secretly seeing another woman named Chassie. At the time they met, Chassie worked as a nurse, and they were introduced through a mutual friend. Chassie fell in love with him and chose to pursue the relationship, despite knowing he was married with children. She soon learned that Robert was experiencing marital problems, which prompted her to visit the fire station frequently to speak with him. Although Robert had been married for 20 years, he succumbed to temptation and began an affair with Chassie, ultimately leaving his wife, Amy. In December 2007, Robert officially started dating Chassie, and by May 2009, she was pregnant. They married on December 28th. At that time, Robert was 40 years old. While Chassie was 22, she claimed she was very happy with her husband. Unfortunately, this happiness did not endure for long. Over time, her feelings waned, and she began to think that the marriage had been a mistake. Chassie later described her relationship with Robert as a foolish choice and a youthful error. On September 9, 2016, Chassie called 911 in a state of panic and distress. She requested that police rush to a rural road 38 kilometers from the city where she was staying with her husband. During the call, she expressed concern for his safety. When police arrived around midnight, they found a car parked nearby with Chassie inside. She had blood on her shoulders and body, but she did not appear injured. According to Chassie, while waiting for the police, she held her husband's head. She remained at his side the entire time. Inside the car was Robert Pointer, who was injured. Chassie had blood on her shoulders, shirt, and legs, but it was not her own, and she was uninjured. Police quickly discovered a head wound on him. Chassie reported seeing an attacker dressed in dark clothing assault Robert. She was still terrified the attacker might return, but she could not exit the vehicle because it was stuck. Additionally, her husband required urgent medical assistance. Sadly, by the time the ambulance arrived, Robert was dead, and it was too late to save him. Chassie stated that it was impossible to understand who would attack them in the darkness. Robert, her husband, had been a good man, serving as a firefighter for many years and rising to the rank of captain. She did not see the attacker's face and could not provide any details. Overwhelmed, she began having difficulty breathing. Eventually, a doctor stabilized her, allowing her to recount the events leading to the murder. That evening, Chassie, 29, was on her way to meet her husband at a fast food restaurant in Rossi, Texas. She was late, got lost in the dark, missed a turn, and drove 5 kilometers in the wrong direction. Upon realizing her error, she decided not to turn back and continued driving. She noticed a country road leading into a field and thought it might help her navigate. Unfortunately, the road was muddy, and her car became stuck. She could not exit. In fact, the road was used by farmers with tractors. It was unusual for Chassie to choose this path, as it was clearly unsuitable for her car. She then called Robert, knowing he was nearby, and asked for assistance. He quickly ran to help her. Upon arrival, he parked along the roadside. Chassie, waiting for him, pointed out the location of her car. He left his vehicle and walked toward her car, moving into the darkness. Chassie remained behind, but after several minutes, she heard an explosion. Fearing for Robert's safety, she ran to her car and found him injured, slumped in the passenger seat. In panic, she called the police. While making the call, she noticed a suspicious dark figure in the distance among the trees. She believed it was the attacker. Fearing for her life, she realized this man had no reason to harm Robert, which caused her to worry she might be the target. Despite her fear, she did not want to leave Robert, so she chose to get into the car with him. Robert Pointer, 47, was a well-respected firefighter. He served at a fire station near University Park in Dallas, Texas, for 19 years, eventually becoming a captain and saving numerous lives. Robert's sudden death was a tremendous loss to his children and family. The police needed to uncover the truth surrounding his death. Robert's young wife, Chassie, struggled to cope with the tragedy and gave vague and inconsistent statements to the authorities. The officers who arrived at the scene began questioning her credibility. On a remote road, an attacker inexplicably chose to kill a stranger. Robert was attacked immediately upon entering the area. It was unclear why the assailant did not target Chassie. The police found this situation perplexing. They observed no struggle or apparent motive for the assault. The attacker emerged silently from the shadows and struck Robert while he was inside his car. Chassie provided information regarding her marriage and her relationship with Robert. She explained that problems had begun years earlier, nearly causing the marriage to fail. A major concern for her was Robert's intention to seek custody of their daughter in the event of a divorce. Chassie spoke with police for over an hour, and as the conversation continued, she shared additional details, not only about her relationship with Robert, but also concerning the assault. Chassie explained that their marriage had deteriorated over time. They had been sleeping in separate rooms for 3 years. She expressed that she did not feel genuine love and believed that Robert still harbored feelings for his ex-wife. Chassie began asserting that Robert was a cruel man. Because he had been taking testosterone injections to boost his hormone levels, she claimed that the injections made him more aggressive and that he frequently used force against her. Chassie accused Robert of humiliating her in multiple ways, including verbal and physical abuse. Eventually, the police chose to release her on bail while continuing their investigation. They spoke with Robert's first wife, Amy, who disputed Chassie's allegations. She stated that Robert had never had a testosterone problem and that cruelty or irritability was not characteristic of him. This perspective was corroborated by his children, relatives, and co-workers. Notably, his daughter recalled living with her father and stepmother for 6 months at age 16 and never witnessing him lose his temper or behave cruelly. This view was echoed by his other daughters. Chassie later attempted to refute the allegations against her, claiming that Robert's daughters from his first marriage had been hostile toward her from the beginning, viewing her as a homewrecker. She explained that she had chosen not to report the domestic abuse to authorities because she did not want to harm Robert's career. Chassie maintained that she had tried to salvage their relationship. During her interactions and interviews with Robert's daughter, Natalie, it was revealed that Chassie had been unfaithful to Robert. Natalie found evidence of the affair on Chassie's computer. An open social media tab displayed conversations with multiple men. After this discovery, Natalie began to notice that her stepmother often left the house for several hours while Robert worked night shifts at the fire department. Meanwhile, the sisters would awaken at night, crying and calling for their mother. Natalie was furious and confronted her father, presenting clear evidence of the situation. This revelation shocked Robert, who considered filing for divorce. However, he ultimately decided against it, choosing instead to attempt to save his marriage. According to Robert's children, he did not wish to leave Chassie for the sake of their young daughter. He made efforts to improve their relationship, but these efforts appeared to be in vain. Robert then installed a surveillance camera at the front door. Just 12 days before the murder, the camera captured an unknown man with Chassie. The police began to suspect Chassie. Despite the officer's doubts, she continued telling her story, frequently adding details that seemed inconsistent. With each discussion with the police, more contradictions appeared in her account, making it less credible. Interestingly, she publicly referred to Michael Garza as her lover. During her interviews with the police, Chassie often paused for extended periods before answering questions. Her interactions seemed to be an attempt to mislead the authorities. She claimed that Robert had decided to file for divorce after discovering she was seeing Michael. Robert confided in his friends at the fire department, who suggested he consider ending the marriage because they could see he and Chassie were incompatible. Robert still hoped to salvage the relationship and decided to take his family on a vacation to Mexico. However, the trip did not go as planned, and on the second day, an argument occurred. Robert noticed that Chassie was speaking excitedly on the phone and suspected she was still in contact with her lover, showing little interest in enjoying their vacation. On Wednesday, they returned from Mexico, and Robert admitted that he could no longer tolerate the situation and filed for divorce. By Friday, Robert had been murdered. After police questioned Chassie, she claimed that despite the affair, she still loved Robert and wanted to save their marriage. To that end, she had planned a date with Robert at a restaurant that night, hoping to reconnect. Chassie then repeated her story about a mysterious stranger attacking Robert. After 2 hours of questioning, she altered her account and stated that she knew the killer. It was her lover, Michael Garza, who had been in the passenger seat of her car at the time of the murder. Chassie's story continued to change. She claimed that shortly before the tragedy, she had told Michael about Robert's anger issues and shared the abuse she had endured for years. This allegedly prompted Michael to attack Robert. On the night of the incident, Chassie suggested they scare Robert so he would stop mistreating her. They planned to stage a situation where the car would appear stuck on a deserted road. Chassie insisted that she did not see the weapon Michael was carrying, stating it was not part of their plan. Michael said he would wait for Robert and asked Chassie to call her husband. Now, Chassie asserted that Michael had orchestrated the ambush. When her husband arrived, she noticed something touching. Robert was wearing the same perfume he had worn on their wedding day, which she believed was his way of trying to please her. Chassie joked about it, and Robert laughed. Although the mood was light, her husband had only a few minutes left to live. Chassie told the police that as soon as Robert got into the car, she yelled at him to stop. She claimed she was trying to prevent Michael from escalating the situation. She stated she had no knowledge of the weapon in the car, saying she had only realized something was wrong and wanted to stop a fight. However, shortly after she screamed, an explosion occurred. When Chassie called for help, Michael snatched the phone from her hand and threw it on the ground before disappearing. After reviewing the false statements and misinformation, the police concluded that Chassie was involved in the murder. They believed she played a central role in the plan and was fully aware of what was going to happen. Chassie was then arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder. At the same time, the police began searching for her boyfriend, Michael. On September 15, 2016, Robert Pointer was buried. Firefighters from across Texas attended his funeral. His family revealed that in his final days, he had actually been prepared to end his relationship with Chassie, as he appeared exhausted by the way she treated him. About a week before his death, Robert contacted a divorce attorney. The day prior to the tragedy, he posted a troubling message on social media, expressing fear of a surprise attack. During this period, he was selling the family home and seeking custody of his daughter from his second marriage. The following day, Robert died, and police believed it was more than mere coincidence. They concluded it was a premeditated murder. Authorities discovered significant evidence on Chassie's cell phone and computer suggesting she had been seeking someone to kill her husband. Numerous text messages had been sent to Chassie's lovers, and police identified at least 4 men with whom she was having affairs at the time. Of these men, Chassie identified Michael as the most susceptible. She then began executing her deception. Her strategy was to convince Michael that Robert posed a danger to her. She presented herself as a victim, claiming to have suffered domestic violence. Although she relayed a similar story to all 4 lovers, only Michael was manipulated. While on vacation in Mexico, Chassie texted him, expressing fear for her life. She instructed Michael that if she did not return from the trip, he should contact the police and report her as a victim of Robert. In response, Michael stated he would kill Robert. During questioning, Chassie claimed she thought it was a joke. Police also interviewed Chassie's other lover, Golden. He stated that Chassie had told him alarming stories about Robert, alleging that her ex-husband was stalking her. However, Golden did not believe her and advised her to contact authorities. Although Chassie claimed abuse, police found no evidence to support her accusations against Robert. Neighbors and relatives reported no problems or domestic incidents. No one observed any bruises on Chassie, even at the time of her husband's death. Later examinations confirmed she showed no signs of physical abuse. People around Robert confirmed that he was one of the kindest individuals they knew. Authorities worked to clarify the details surrounding the incident. Michael had fled. Although police searched his home, he could not be located. However, Michael turned himself in the following day and was charged with the murder of Robert Pointer. He was uncooperative and refused to speak with police. At that time, the murder weapon had not been recovered, and searches were unsuccessful. Fortunately, 5 weeks after the murder, a farmer reported discovering a shotgun while plowing a field a few hundred yards from where Robert had been killed. The shotgun was still loaded, and the bullets matched those that killed Robert. Additionally, a shirt was found near the murder weapon, and DNA testing confirmed it belonged to Michael. Police contacted Chassie again, and she eventually admitted knowing about the murder weapon's existence. However, she maintained she had no involvement in planning the crime. On July 10, 2018, Michael Garza's trial commenced. During the hearing, he continued asserting his innocence and made a surprising claim. He stated that he had taken the weapon from his brother, but insisted he had no intention of killing Robert, claiming he had given it to Chassie at her request. Michael provided an alibi, stating he was at his farm several dozen miles from the crime scene, caring for a sick cow at the time of the murder. However, he could not substantiate his alibi. Despite attempts to defend himself, the jury did not believe him. On July 20th, he was convicted of murder and sentenced to 99 years in prison. The prosecutor contended that Chassie orchestrated the killing. It was evident that Michael could not have lured Robert to the remote country road alone. Chassie was an accomplice in the scheme. The prosecution presented Chassie's text messages to reveal her true intentions, showing she had used Michael as a pawn, deceiving him into believing she genuinely loved him. In reality, he had been naive. After Robert's murder and her interactions with police, Chassie planned to spend the night with another lover, as her text messages revealed. Her attorney argued it was an out-of-control accident and not her fault, claiming that if there had been a secret plan, the actual perpetrator would not have called police after the murder, but would have attempted to cover it up. The prosecution argued that Chassie had acted out of fear. Although she did not testify at trial, the jury viewed a video of her holding her head and saying, "Oh no, what have I done?" This was considered a confession regarding her husband's murder. After 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found Chassie Pointer guilty of murder and sentenced her to 30 years in prison. Moving on to the next case. The case of Ryan Widmer. Sarah and Ryan Widmer met at a favorite coffee shop. Ryan ordered a cup of coffee while Sarah was waiting in line and happened to notice a book on his table that she had just finished reading. Their shared interest in literature sparked their first conversation. Gradually, they spent many hours discussing common topics such as books, movies, music, and daily routines. Through these conversations, they discovered that they both loved nature, travel, and animals. After each meeting, their relationship grew closer and more trusting. Their understanding and trust continued to deepen. Eventually, their relationship developed into love. After a few months of dating, Ryan proposed to Sarah during a romantic sunset at the same coffee shop where they had met. Sarah felt immense happiness and accepted the proposal. The young couple planned their wedding and found a 2-story house in Hamilton. On April 10, 2008, their wedding took place. They chose a small church for the ceremony, attended by close friends and beloved family. Every detail, even the smallest, was specially planned by Sarah. On the important day, Sarah looked gorgeous and beautiful, and Ryan could not take his eyes off her. After the wedding and reception, the couple went on a honeymoon to the Hawaiian Islands, where they spent 2 weeks exploring paradise and enjoying time together. At this point, they were deeply in love and had already planned for the future, dreaming of having children. On the evening of Monday, August 11, 2008, after finishing work at the dental clinic, Sarah met Ryan at a cafe. They had dinner and talked happily before walking home. Sarah unpacked her groceries and sat down on the couch. Ryan brought her a glass of water and a headache pill. He gave her a bath, and they finished watching their favorite TV show together. Sarah went upstairs to the bedroom. She undressed, folded her clothes neatly, prepared a towel, lit a scented candle, and turned on her favorite music. Ryan pressed the button on the TV remote, pausing the football game a few times. He lay on the couch for no more than 10 minutes. He called to his wife, but Sarah did not hear him, so he slowly went upstairs. In the bedroom, Ryan turned on the TV and called Sarah again. There was silence. In a panic, he entered the bathroom and found Sarah lying face down in the bathtub. Ryan unplugged the bathtub and took out his phone to call 911. At 10:49 p.m., under police direction, Ryan finally got Sarah out of the bathtub and performed CPR on her. Within 6 minutes, an ambulance and police arrived at Ryan's home. An initial inspection of the scene drew the attention of the police. The bathroom was dry and clean, with no signs of water or scattered objects. Sarah lay on the bedroom floor, naked, her skin dry. Only her wet hair suggested she had drowned. A paramedic performed CPR when there was no pulse. A pinkish-white fluid flowed from Sarah's nose and mouth. 2 attempts to intubate Sarah while she was on the bedroom floor were unsuccessful. She was then rushed to the emergency room, where 2 more attempts were made to restore her heart rate with a defibrillator, both unsuccessful. During this time, Ryan remained by his wife's side. Within 20 minutes of arriving at the hospital, they attempted to revive Sarah, but at 11:41 p.m., an emergency room doctor pronounced her dead. Ryan knelt in the hospital hallway and cried. Relatives and friends of the couple could not have imagined that just 4 months after their wedding, a tragedy would occur that would shock the entire city and make Ryan the prime suspect in Sarah's death. When police questioned him at the hospital, Ryan's initial statements raised suspicions. He claimed that he and his wife had been home that night. They had dined out, returned home, and watched TV. Because Sarah had a headache, Ryan gave her painkillers and led her to the bathroom. Some details in Ryan's statement did not match the emergency call records. The victim had collapsed face down, whereas Ryan stated that his wife had been lying face up. This discrepancy led the police to question Ryan's account. Ryan was deeply shocked by the events and repeatedly called Sarah's name. Under pressure from the police, he was compelled to participate in the investigation to provide information about Sarah's death. He agreed to allow his house to be searched. Analysis of the medication Sarah had taken revealed that it was a common painkiller typically used to treat headaches and migraines. However, she had also been taking a course of medication that altered her hormones and caused her to fall into an uncontrollable sleep. After searching the house, traces of blood were discovered on the carpet. During the investigation, police identified several signs that raised suspicion about Ryan's story. Upon arriving at the scene, the bathtub and tiles were dry with no indications of water. No wet items, clothing, or other objects were found in the house that could have absorbed water. The autopsy revealed that Sarah had multiple injuries to her body, including bruises on her head, neck, armpits, and lips. However, there were no signs of a struggle or resistance. Sarah's fingernails were intact, not broken or chipped. This did not align with the theory that she had been murdered after a struggle. Sarah's autopsy, conducted by Dr. Russell Appointment Grove, indicated that she died of drowning. During the examination, experts also discovered multiple muscle hemorrhages on the front of her neck and bruises on her head. These injuries were determined to have occurred prior to her death. However, the cause of these injuries remained unknown. Toxicology tests ruled out the presence of illegal substances or alcohol in Sarah's blood, making the cause of her death more difficult to determine. On August 13, 2008, Ryan was arrested on suspicion of murdering his wife. The charge was based on the emergency call, a scene that did not match reality, and the injuries on Sarah's body. This evidence was sufficient to charge him with the murder of his wife. Ryan and Sarah were deeply in love, as friends and neighbors confirmed. They never argued or fought publicly and always planned their lives together. What caused Sarah's death? In March 2009, the first trial began with emergency line officer Ron Cronenberger taking the stand. He described the phone conversation with Ryan as calm and relaxed. However, Ron Cronenberger also stated that Ryan appeared to be merely blowing into the phone, pretending to perform CPR. The prosecution argued that information from the 911 call, the scene, and Sarah's injuries was sufficient to prove that Ryan killed her by forcing her underwater and drowning her in the bathtub. The main piece of evidence in the case was the bathtub. Police examined it for fingerprints and identified what they believed to be human handprints located closer to the middle of the tub. Using a reflective ultraviolet photographic process, fingerprints and stains were detected on the bathtub. A fingerprint was found on the forearm, and hair follicle testing determined it had been left by an adult male, although the age of the fingerprint could not be established. The police called in a medical expert, who testified that falling asleep and dying in a bathtub was unlikely unless illegal drugs or alcohol were involved. According to the expert, the sensation of water on the face could have awakened the person or triggered a reflex response in the airway. Otherwise, the reduction in oxygen in the muscles would likely have woken the victim. Additionally, the pathologist who performed the autopsy, was called to testify. He stated that if Sarah had a dry body but wet hair, a likely explanation would be that her head had been pushed off the edge of the bathtub, toilet, or sink. She could have been pushed forward or backward in running water or in a full bathtub. According to the prosecution's case, Ryan held Sarah's head underwater until she drowned, and on that basis, he should be convicted. Ryan's defense attorney argued that he was innocent and had no motive to kill Sarah. The attorney stated that if there had been a violent struggle, as the prosecution claimed, there would have been evidence of it. However, Ryan had no injuries, and Sarah's fingernails were not broken or chipped. The attorney argued that the injuries found on Sarah were the result of prolonged CPR, direct cardiac massage, and multiple attempts at intubation that night, in the house, in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, and at the hospital itself. At the defense's request, a second autopsy was performed. Dr. Werner Spitz conducted the examination and again confirmed that the cause of death was drowning. He observed injuries to her neck, arms, upper lip, skull, a lacerated liver, and bleeding from her neck, but could not determine whether these injuries were caused by CPR. Those present argued that paramedics had been trying to resuscitate Sarah for approximately 45 minutes, and the deep bleeding inside her neck could have been caused by N4 being inserted there because paramedics could not access the veins in her arms. Instead of ruling it a homicide, Dr. Werner Spitz declared Sarah's death undetermined. The defense argued that her skin was dry because skin dries faster than hair. They also explained that when Ryan found his wife unconscious, he pushed the drain in the bathtub, tried to help her, and called emergency services. This sequence of events explains why her body was drier than expected. The water had drained from the bathtub even before Ryan called 911. However, it remains unknown whether the jury's verdict would have changed if they had received credible evidence that Sarah's medical condition could have caused the drowning. The official reason for denying a new trial was that the jury had made errors in its investigation. Ryan was surprised when Jennifer Cruz came to the prosecutor's office to testify about his guilt. She stated that she was friends with Ryan and that he had been in regular contact with her by phone or email. According to Jennifer's testimony, he called on October 26, 2009, at 11:09 p.m. In a very upset voice, he told her that he had beaten Sarah in the living room on the day of her death. Sarah had discovered his infidelity and seen inappropriate photos. They argued for a long time, first downstairs and then in the bedroom. Ryan pushed her into the bathroom and left his wife there without checking on her. He was angry, and after calming down, he found Sarah floating in a bathtub full of water. To cover his tracks, he wiped up the water on the bathroom floor with a towel and concocted a plan to make it appear as an accident. Ryan's attorneys worked hard to prove his innocence. They attempted to discredit Jennifer's testimony, arguing that it was unreliable. One obvious point was that no towels were found in the house, including in the dryer. Additionally, there was no evidence of infidelity in their marriage. The family had no financial problems and never argued. Friends described Ryan as a kind and helpful person who never displayed anger. Furthermore, Ryan would not have benefited from his wife's death, as he did not have a life insurance policy. Before the third trial began, Jennifer was discredited and barred from testifying. The call in which Ryan allegedly confessed to her was not authenticated. In January 2011, a trial was held based on new evidence. The defense argued that Sarah had underlying medical conditions that could have caused her to suddenly lose consciousness and drown. Several medical experts testified in support of the defense, stating that some heart or neurological defect could have led to the loss of consciousness. However, the state's medical experts disagreed with this assessment. The trial also revealed additional details about Sarah's health and daily routine. Her co-workers testified that she often slept in her car before going to work at the dental office due to severe allergies and stomach aches. On the day of her death, Sarah had complained of headaches and stomach aches to her dentist boss. That evening, Sarah spoke to a friend and mentioned her headaches and neck pain, and her friend said she looked extremely tired. Her ability to fall asleep quickly led her friends to suspect that she might have narcolepsy. Narcolepsy is a sleep disorder characterized by excessive daytime sleepiness. People with narcolepsy often have difficulty staying awake and need to take frequent naps to cope. However, Sarah's mother, Ruth Stewart, disputed this idea when she testified as a prosecution witness at trial. She claimed that she had never seen her daughter experience sleep problems and described Sarah as a healthy and active child with a regular daily routine. Sarah's medical records also supported this claim. As a dental hygienist, Sarah had undergone regular checkups, and her last examination showed no signs of health problems. In addition, other witnesses who claimed Sarah was excessively sleepy provided unconvincing testimony. In cases where a person is strangled from behind, the victim often suffers defensive injuries to the arms and legs, as well as injuries to the small bones in the neck. However, Sarah's autopsy did not show any such injuries. The defense urged the jury to consider all the facts surrounding the case, including that Ryan had no reason to harm Sarah. Once again, the defense was defeated. After about 12 hours of deliberation, Ryan was convicted of murder and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The jury based their decision on the lack of water on Sarah's body and around the bathtub, and the conclusion that Ryan's call to 911 was staged. One juror stated that Ryan's demeanor in court was one of the main reasons they believed he was guilty. When the autopsy photos were shown, they felt that Ryan was completely unresponsive. Ryan did not take the stand, although he told the court after the verdict was announced that he loved his wife and did not hurt her. Ryan remains in custody, awaiting a federal court ruling that could determine his parole status. After 14 years in prison, his first chance for parole will be in July 2025. With each passing year, Ryan holds out hope that the next year will bring him freedom. He continues to maintain his innocence and profess his love for Sarah, insisting that he did not harm her. Ryan's chances of parole in 2025 appear slim, as the parole board tends to favor inmates who show remorse. Since Ryan has always maintained his innocence, he could face an uphill battle for parole. Moving on to the next case. The case of Sabrina Zunick. Sabrina Zunick was born on October 27, 1994, in Cleveland, Ohio, United States. Her father is Mark Zunick, and her mother is Susan Edwards. Sabrina's family lived in social isolation. Both of her parents struggled with illegal substance and alcohol addiction. They were arrested multiple times. Therefore, from the age of 3, her grandmother assumed responsibility for her upbringing. By the age of 4, Sabrina was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, a condition related to a nervous system disorder, which severely affected her ability to control herself. She also suffered from oppositional defiant disorder, anxiety, depression, and bipolar disorder. Throughout her childhood, Sabrina faced significant difficulties in controlling her behavior. She often displayed aggression and lack of self-control, leading to conflicts with her classmates. This continued throughout her adolescence, causing her to become increasingly isolated and unable to maintain normal social relationships. At age 14, Sabrina was removed from her grandmother's care and placed in an orphanage run by the Lake County Department of Children's Services. She lived in the orphanage for 2 years. In 2011, Sabrina was adopted by Kevin Knopfel and Lisa, and moved to live with them in Willoughby Hills, Ohio. Lisa Knopfel is a compassionate woman who cares for and supports those around her. Lisa, born on May 2, 1971, in Reynoldsburg, Ohio, is the daughter of Clark and Rita. After marrying Kevin, she moved to Lake County in 2000 and became the mother of 2 daughters, Megan and Haley. With a kind heart and a passion for learning, Lisa works as a social worker in the juvenile department of Cuyahoga County, Ohio. Her greatest dream is to open an orphanage where she can provide care and love to children in difficult circumstances. It was here that Lisa met Sabrina. Joining the Knopfel family had a profound and transformative effect on Sabrina. As a high school student, she began to develop a love for learning, improved her grades, and started planning for her future. One day, Sabrina confided in her adoptive parents about her dream of becoming a model and pursuing a career in cosmetology. Seeing the positive changes in Sabrina, Lisa and Kevin were very pleased and supported her. Sabrina also developed a deep bond with Lisa and the rest of the Knopfel family. Many people around them remarked that Lisa and Sabrina seemed like real sisters. Sabrina often expressed her admiration for Lisa, considered her a role model, and affectionately referred to her as an older sister. However, the peace in the family did not last long. Problems emerged 6 months after Sabrina joined the household. Suddenly, Sabrina began accusing Lisa of not loving her and favoring Lisa's biological daughters. As the relationship between Sabrina and Lisa deteriorated, Sabrina grew closer to Kevin. Friends and family began noticing troubling behavior between the two. Their conversations and jokes appeared more like those of a couple than a father and daughter. On October 27, 2012, Sabrina turned 18. Legally, she was required to leave the foster home and live independently. However, Sabrina requested permission from her adoptive parents to stay and finish high school. Then, in the early hours of November 16, 2012, around 1 a.m., Sabrina grabbed a 10-inch serrated kitchen knife, entered Lisa's bedroom, and silently stood by her bed for 15 minutes, watching her sleep. Suddenly, Sabrina began stabbing Lisa repeatedly. Lisa awoke after the first strikes and screamed in pain. Her cries alerted her 13-year-old daughter, Megan, who ran to the bedroom and saw Sabrina holding the knife. Terrified, Megan ran to call emergency services, sobbing and screaming that her sister was attacking her mother. When law enforcement arrived, they found Sabrina with several minor cuts on her body, holding a knife and appearing to be in shock. At that time, she followed officers' instructions to drop the knife and place her hands behind her head. She was arrested without resistance, but refused to answer any questions once at the police station. During a search of the house, officers discovered Haley, Lisa's youngest daughter, locked in a closet. That night, Kevin was out of town on a business trip, working as a truck driver. He learned about the incident when the police called him. Shortly afterward, Kevin called 911 to check on the condition of his daughters and was informed he could come to the police station to pick them up. The next day, Kevin arrived at the police station with an unexpectedly calm demeanor. His unusual composure surprised the officers. They had expected to see a man grieving over his murdered wife, but he appeared unperturbed. Without answering any questions, Kevin quietly took his daughters home without displaying any obvious emotion. Kevin's behavior was not only difficult for the police to understand, but it also raised concern among his and Lisa's relatives and friends. They found it strange that he did not seem sad or depressed after such a devastating tragedy. Immediately afterward, Kevin attempted to request a visit with Sabrina in prison, but this request was denied. When he was denied permission to see Sabrina, Kevin's calm demeanor quickly turned to anger. He returned home with a visibly upset expression. The brutal crime shocked the local media. Lake County Police revealed that Lisa had sustained 178 injuries to her head, neck, torso, and limbs. Although Sabrina was quickly identified as the killer, investigators were initially baffled by her motive for committing such an appalling act. In the 10 months following the murder, detectives worked tirelessly to piece together the evidence. The suspicious relationship between Sabrina and Kevin became a central focus of the investigation. Through interviews with those involved, some remarkable information emerged, shedding light on the complex nature of the case. One of the first revelations came from a close friend of Sabrina's. She stated that Sabrina had confided that she had allowed Kevin to take nude photos of her in exchange for money. This revelation immediately raised suspicions of an illicit relationship between Kevin and his adopted daughter. In addition, just a week before the murder, Kevin had contacted a social worker to inform her that he and Lisa were considering divorce. During this conversation, Kevin expressed his intention to retain custody of Sabrina. Another shocking detail came from the testimony of a different friend of Sabrina's. This individual stated that in early October 2012, Kevin asked her to help him find a hitman. This information led investigators to suspect that Kevin might have been the mastermind behind the murder. During further investigation, police discovered that Kevin had purchased 2 life insurance policies worth a total of $800,000 in Lisa's name. Just days later, she was declared dead. Immediately after the murder, Kevin began spending lavishly, purchasing many expensive items. These actions were not only suspicious, but also suggested that Kevin had a financial motive for his wife's death. Initially, Sabrina denied any involvement of Kevin in the case. However, after 9 months in custody, in August 2013, she changed her testimony. Feeling abandoned by her adoptive father and unsupported in her difficult situation, Sabrina decided to cooperate with investigators. In her testimony, she provided important details about Kevin's role and motive in killing Lisa, bringing the case to a crucial turning point. Sabrina accused Kevin of orchestrating Lisa's murder and shared specific details about their romantic relationship. She claimed that her motive for killing Lisa was her deep love for Kevin and her refusal to share him with anyone else. According to Sabrina, their affair began in March 2012 when Kevin returned home exhausted from long hours of truck driving. Complaining of leg pain, Sabrina offered to massage his feet, which marked the beginning of their growing attraction. By September of that year, they had developed an intimate relationship. Sabrina stated that Lisa never suspected their affair because they behaved cautiously. Kevin frequently sent Sabrina messages expressing his lack of love for Lisa and his desire to build a new life with Sabrina. Kevin proposed a plan to Sabrina, promising her a stable future funded by money from Lisa's insurance policies. He assured her that he would provide a house and a car and suggested that she could take Lisa's place as the daughter's mother. Sabrina hesitated, recommending instead that Kevin file for divorce. However, Kevin rejected this idea, claiming that Lisa would take the daughters away from him if they were to separate. He repeatedly joked that a dead Lisa was worth much more than a living one. Gradually, Kevin's plan to eliminate Lisa took shape, and they decided that Sabrina would kill Lisa by stabbing her. To make the murder appear as a failed robbery, Sabrina would also steal some of Lisa's jewelry. Kevin took further steps to execute the plan. He purchased the knife intended for the murder and researched how to deliver fatal blows to the victim. He also instructed Sabrina to feign mental instability if she were ever arrested. Sabrina revealed that the final turning point occurred on the morning of November 15th, the day before the murder. While driving her to school, Kevin abruptly stopped the car and began crying. He admitted to Sabrina that he had fought with Lisa the previous night and confessed that he would harm himself if Lisa remained alive. Fearing that the man she loved might end his life, Sabrina resolved to kill Lisa. Based on Sabrina's testimony, investigators decided to arrest Kevin. On August 9, 2013, he was taken into custody. He was charged with conspiracy to commit aggravated murder and accessory to murder in exchange for the possibility of parole. Sabrina agreed to testify against him. In addition, the defense announced plans to appeal the verdict and intended to focus on expert testimony regarding Sabrina's mental health issues, arguing that her mental disorders were the sole reason she committed the murder. Kevin's trial began in May 2014, with the prosecutor asserting that there was no doubt that Sabrina had committed the murder. However, he emphasized that Kevin was fully aware of what would happen on November 16th and actively assisted Sabrina in planning the crime, which made him equally culpable. When Sabrina testified, she admitted to having an affair with Kevin and explained how they planned the crime together. She claimed the plan was Kevin's idea and stated that she carried it out only because she loved him and did not want him to suffer. Sabrina told the jury she wanted justice, emphasizing that she was not the sole person involved. The prosecution focused on Kevin's suspicious behavior after Lisa's death to clarify his motives and his unusual demeanor. The police officer who met Kevin the day after the murder testified that Kevin appeared unusually calm and unemotional under such circumstances. A co-worker of Lisa's was also called to testify. She recalled bringing food to Kevin's home after Lisa's death to comfort the family, but noticed that Kevin acted very calmly, seemingly unaffected by the loss. Lisa's co-worker also stated that at the funeral, Kevin showed no signs of grief, which struck her and others as unusual. Additionally, a representative from the insurance company was called to testify. This person revealed that Kevin had contacted them the morning after the murder to inquire about the claim procedure for the life insurance policy he had purchased for Lisa not long before. These details were presented by the prosecution to highlight Kevin's cold and calculating nature in the events surrounding Lisa's death. The trial also included testimony from the Lake County medical examiner, who described the horrific injuries Lisa sustained. He detailed 2 fatal wounds, one to her jaw, which severed her carotid artery, and another to her chest. The examiner added that the large number of wounds indicated Lisa resisted fiercely and fought for her life for several minutes before succumbing to her injuries. These gruesome descriptions underscored the brutality of the crime. Although investigators could not provide copies of the text messages exchanged between Sabrina and Kevin, they presented data on the number of messages and calls exchanged. According to the cellular operator, the two exchanged 1,491 text messages and made 78 calls between November 1st and November 16th, 2012. Kevin's lawyer argued that Sabrina should be considered solely responsible for Lisa's murder. He pointed out that investigators had no physical evidence proving Sabrina and Kevin were lovers. Furthermore, there were no specific text messages that directly implicated Kevin in planning Lisa's death. The defense argued that the prosecution's case rested entirely on Sabrina's testimony, which secured her a reduced sentence in return. The lawyer asserted that Kevin should be released, claiming the charges against him were baseless. He argued that Sabrina killed her adoptive mother not because of Kevin's influence, but because Lisa, 2 weeks earlier, had demanded Sabrina move out of their house by January 1, 2013. Meanwhile, Kevin refused to testify in court. After a 9.5-hour hearing on June 11th, the jury found Kevin Knopfel guilty on all 11 charges. On August 6, 2014, Judge Joseph Gibson sentenced Kevin to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. This means Kevin will be eligible for parole in 2044 at the age of 73. After the trial, in which Sabrina provided detailed testimony about her role in Lisa's murder, the judges found her guilty of premeditated murder with aggravating circumstances. During the trial, Sabrina's defense attorney emphasized that she had admitted her guilt. Sabrina also confirmed this admission during a hearing in August 2014, expressing remorse for her actions. On September 29, 2014, at the age of 19, Sabrina Zunick was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. This means she will be eligible for parole in 2042, when she turns 47. Sabrina broke down in tears upon hearing the verdict. In explaining the sentence, the judge stated that the only reason Sabrina was being considered for parole was her cooperation with investigators. However, the judge also noted that although Kevin manipulated and used Sabrina to carry out his plot, her brutal actions went far beyond the original plan. In addition to the life sentence, the court ordered Sabrina to pay $6 million in compensation to Lisa's 2 biological daughters, Megan and Haley Knopfel, to help them overcome the emotional and financial losses caused by their mother's death. Currently, Sabrina is serving her sentence at the Dayton Correctional Facility, a women's detention center in Ohio. The prison, established in 1987, is known for its rehabilitation and education programs designed to help inmates rebuild their lives. Sabrina will spend most of her life in prison, facing the consequences of her actions and the indelible memories of a murder that changed many lives forever. Moving on to the next case. The case of Susan Wright. Susan Lucille Wright was born on April 24, 1976, in Houston, Texas, to parents Velma Sue and Jimmy Lawrence Wright. She was the eldest of 2 children and had a biological sister named Cindy. As a child, Susan was active, sociable, and creatively talented. During her school years, she developed a passion for dancing and aspired to become a choreographer. With her bright and attractive appearance, as well as her slender figure, she drew many admirers and enjoyed being the center of attention. After completing high school, Susan attempted, but was unsuccessful, in gaining admission to college. To raise funds for her future education, she decided to take some time off. During this period, she found work as a dancer at a well-known nightclub, performing partially nude on stage. She later decided to leave her job and use her savings to enroll in evening courses at a nursing school. To support herself and maintain her independence, Susan took a job as a waitress at a restaurant while pursuing her studies. However, she soon discovered that medicine was not her true passion and struggled to pay for her education. Consequently, she stopped attending classes to focus on her job. In the summer of 1997, 21-year-old Susan met her future husband, Jeffrey Andrew Wright, at the Galveston restaurant where she worked. He was immediately drawn to her beauty and radiant smile, becoming a regular customer and leaving generous tips. After some time, Jeffrey gathered the courage to ask Susan for her phone number. He would call her daily, sometimes multiple times a day, to arrange romantic dates and surprise her with small gestures, such as sending flowers with heartfelt notes to her workplace. In the evenings, he would meet her and walk her home. Jeffrey was 8 years older than Susan, but she did not consider this a significant issue. He was charming, attentive, and caring, which quickly won her over. However, it soon became apparent that Jeffrey struggled with alcohol and substance abuse. He claimed to have overcome his drug addiction and promised to quit drinking entirely. Susan, being young and in love for the first time, believed him. She thought their love could overcome any obstacle. Shortly afterward, Susan discovered she was pregnant and excitedly shared the news with Jeffrey. Although he appeared pleased about becoming a father, he did not take any decisive action, such as proposing or suggesting they move in together. Confused by Jeffrey's behavior, Susan took matters into her own hands. She insisted that their child should be born within a married family, and Jeffrey agreed to her terms. By the time they officially married, Susan was already 8 months pregnant. They chose to have a quiet, intimate wedding without guests or celebrations, rather than a grand ceremony. Around this time, they purchased a home in a quiet area of Harris County, Texas, and moved in a couple of weeks before the birth of their child. In December 1998, they welcomed their first child, a son named Bradley, and appeared to be the perfect family. In 2001, Susan became pregnant again, and in the spring of 2002, she gave birth to a daughter named Kay. The family had a small dog named Buck and a comfortable family car. Jeffrey worked at a local construction company, and after the children were born, Susan became a stay-at-home mom by mutual agreement. She took care of the children and created a cozy home environment. The neighbors said that Susan was a kind person, friendly, sociable, a caring mother, and a loving wife. However, it was later revealed that the reality of their family life was far from perfect. Her husband was extremely demanding in every aspect of their lives. Susan's days were filled with cleaning, doing laundry, and cooking. Jeffrey demanded freshly cooked meals every day, prohibiting her from preparing meals in advance or reheating leftovers. Maintaining a perfect and clean home was a challenging task, especially with 2 small children. Additionally, Jeffrey required his clothes to be washed almost daily, as he refused to wear the same item twice. If Susan failed to meet these expectations, she faced insults, humiliation, and even physical abuse. Moreover, Jeffrey was extremely frugal, providing Susan with a meager weekly allowance of $100 to cover all household expenses, including cooking, childcare, and maintenance. Susan had to track every expense and provide receipts to her husband, Jeffrey. However, Jeffrey's behavior was an even bigger issue. Despite promising to quit drinking, he continued and began using drugs, downplaying it as light doping to cope with work stress. The substances made him aggressive, causing him to harm Susan and their son. Jeffrey denied that his behavior was a problem, claiming that Susan knew about his substance use before their marriage. His parents sympathized with Susan, but felt powerless to intervene. After moving in together, Jeffrey's behavior became increasingly aggressive, resulting in physical, emotional, and intimate abuse. He initially apologized, but the violence became regular. Jeffrey would often go to the gym 3 times a week to practice boxing as a way to relieve stress. He looked forward to sharing this activity with his son when the boy was older. On January 13, 2003, Jeffrey returned home from the gym agitated and on edge. As Susan prepared dinner, he attempted to teach their 5-year-old son some boxing moves, but lost control and struck the child, causing him to burst into tears. Susan pretended not to notice the incident, but it was the last straw for her. Following dinner, she put the children to bed. Meanwhile, Jeffrey remained in the bedroom, continuing to take drugs. There are different accounts of what happened next. According to Susan, when she went into the room, Jeffrey assaulted her, attempted to rape her, and tried to stab her with a knife. She claimed she fought back in self-defense after managing to take the knife from him. The events that followed are unclear, with differing accounts of what occurred. According to Susan, when she entered the bedroom, Jeffrey tried to attack her, sexually assault her, and kill her with a knife. However, she claimed she managed to grab the knife and defended herself, leading to a struggle. Her story changed multiple times, but the version presented in court, based on the investigation, was considered more credible. Susan decided to use her dance skills to distract her husband and lower his guard. Wearing a short silk robe over her bare body, she put on a seductive display for Jeffrey. She then suggested a role-playing game that involved tying him up, which he agreed to. Using 3 of Jeffrey's neckties, she bound his hands and 1 leg to the bed. She used the silk belt from her robe to secure his other leg. With Jeffrey immobilized, Susan created a makeshift gag using her underwear, pretending it was part of the intimate game. To set the mood, she lit candles and turned off the lights. Jeffrey was tied to the bed with a gag in his mouth, unable to move or speak. The room was dimly lit. Jeffrey poured hot wax from a candle onto his chest, which was painful but initially seemed like part of the game. However, when she poured wax onto his genital area, the pain became unbearable. Jeffrey tried to free himself and scream, but he could not. Susan then took a small, sharp knife from the kitchen and began stabbing him repeatedly, starting at his groin and moving up his body, slashing his genitals, legs, abdomen, chest, arms, neck, and face. She stabbed slowly at first, expressing her grievances with each strike, recounting the insults, humiliations, and abuse she had suffered. As she continued, Susan began to cry and stab faster. Experts later counted 193 shallow knife wounds on Jeffrey's body. Most of these wounds were not fatal, and Jeffrey was conscious for most of the ordeal. Susan's actions suggested she was in a state of extreme emotional distress. Her lawyers argued that she was in a state of affect, unable to stop even when Jeffrey showed no signs of life. She had not considered what she would do next or how she would handle the body in a shallow grave in the backyard. She sat next to her husband's body on the floor for hours. Eventually, she looked around the blood-covered bedroom and realized she had to act before dawn. She carefully checked outside through the window, ensuring the coast was clear. Her gaze fell on a shallow pit in the backyard that Jeffrey had dug for a fountain over the weekend. A plan formed instantly. This pit would become her despised husband's grave. To move the body, Susan used a garden wheelbarrow. This raised questions for investigators, as a petite woman had apparently lifted and transported a man twice her weight out of the house single-handedly. Suspicions of an accomplice arose, but were never confirmed. Under the cover of darkness, Susan discreetly relocated the body to the pit and covered it with a thin layer of soil. She then cleaned up, removing the blood-stained curtains and bed linens, placing them in trash bags, and dispersing them in different bins. The blood-soaked mattress was flipped over, as Susan was unsure how to properly clean it. She spent the remaining time until dawn scrubbing blood from the floor, walls, and carpet. Scrubbing the carpet was a major task due to a large stain that could not be removed. In an attempt to eliminate any evidence of the violent confrontation, Susan applied bleach to the affected area, hoping the chemicals would destroy any remaining traces. Susan then made a distressing call to her husband's parents in Austin, Texas. She was emotional as she recounted the events. Her husband, under the influence, had physically assaulted her and their son, spilled bleach on the carpet, and ended their relationship before leaving. Jeffrey's parents were shocked and concerned by the news. Although they were aware their son had his flaws, they felt genuine sympathy for their daughter-in-law. However, when they learned he had hit their grandchild, they immediately offered for Susan and the children to come and stay with them. Despite their willingness to help, the young mother declined their offer. She added that she planned to file a police report and reveal all the incidents that had occurred at their residence. 2 days later, Susan visited the police station as her husband's sudden disappearance raised increasing concerns and required action. Susan reported that she and her children had been victims of domestic violence perpetrated by her husband and needed protection. She successfully obtained a restraining order against her husband, preventing him from approaching her and the children, although she was already aware that he would never be able to come near them again. As evidence, Susan presented bruises and cuts on her arms, which she alleged were inflicted by her husband using keys when she attempted to defend herself. Additionally, Susan had a small bruise on her face and corroborated that her father-in-law had struck her husband. At first, the tearful woman's story seemed believable and logical. She claimed her husband, under the influence of alcohol and substances, had attacked her and their young son. Then, realizing what he had done, he became scared and fled. However, over time, suspicions grew because Jeffrey had not contacted anyone. He appeared to have run away without his belongings, documents, or mobile phone. He did not show up for work or visit his parents, and none of his friends or neighbors had seen him. It was as if he had vanished. Susan found it unbearable to stay in the house where she had confronted her husband. She could not shake the feeling that he was still alive and would rise for revenge. She was losing her grip on reality. Even their dog, Buck, sensed it, constantly barking and trying to dig up the yard where Jeffrey was buried. On January 17th, Susan went to her mother's house with her children. When her mother saw her daughter in person, she fully realized the severity of the situation, even though she had already been aware of it. Velma directly asked if she had killed her husband, and her daughter broke down in tears, nodding in admission. She then confessed to the crime, revealing the location of her husband's body and repeatedly expressing uncertainty about what to do next. Following her mother's advice, Susan reached out to lawyer Neil Davis the next day and confessed to killing her husband and attempting to cover up the crime. After gathering all the details, the experienced defense attorney considered possible scenarios and contacted the Harris County District Attorney's Office on January 19th. Davis reported Susan's confession, including the burial of her husband's body in their backyard, and stated that she was willing to provide a full statement at the police station. On January 24, 2003, Susan voluntarily went to the police station, intent on making a full confession. However, her account was disjointed, with confusing details and occasional contradictions. She sometimes referred to her late husband as if he were still alive, expressed fear of him, and requested protection. Consequently, Susan underwent a psychiatric evaluation. The results revealed that she had suffered a nervous breakdown and was experiencing depression. Despite this, the evaluation found that Susan was still capable of understanding the actions she had taken. When investigators uncovered the remains of Jeffrey from the makeshift grave in the backyard, they were shocked by the brutality of the scene, having never encountered anything like it. Experts counted a total of 193 knife wounds on the victim's body, distributed across various areas, including the groin, legs, shoulders, arms, abdominal area, chest, neck, and face. The majority of these wounds were superficial, meaning they were not life-threatening on their own. However, one head wound was severe enough to have caused death. The large number of superficial wounds suggests that the victim endured a prolonged and agonizing death, likely while still conscious, as his wife repeatedly stabbed him with a small knife. The victim's wrists and ankles showed deep marks from the ties and belt used to bind him. These injuries indicated that the victim had attempted to free himself but was unsuccessful. The ties and belt were still on the body when it was found. Additionally, there were traces of candle wax on the victim's chest and groin area. Susan claimed that the candle wax was an accident, resulting from her husband knocking over a lit candle. However, the prosecution argued that the hot wax was more likely used as a form of torture to inflict suffering on the bound victim. Furthermore, the victim's mouth contained his wife's underwear, which acted as a gag to prevent him from screaming or calling for help. Toxicological tests showed that the deceased had alcohol and several controlled substances in his system, which could have contributed to aggressive and irrational behavior. Initially, the bedroom where the confrontation occurred seemed normal, except for a large bleach stain on the carpet. However, upon closer inspection using special chemical agents and equipment, it became clear that Susan had spent considerable time cleaning up the scene. Once wiped away, blood traces were revealed, showing the true extent of the violence. Blood was found throughout the room, including on the ceiling, and the mattress was saturated with it. The trial began in late February 2004, with Susan having already spent a year in custody. Her children were being cared for by her parents and sister Cindy. Her lawyer was well prepared, having worked extensively with Susan to build her case. During the trial, Susan frequently broke down in tears as she recounted the events of that horrific night and the abuse she had suffered leading up to it. She claimed to have endured years of cruelty and violence at the hands of her husband. The defendant, Susan, stated that on the evening of the incident, her husband returned home from training in an agitated state. He began demonstrating boxing techniques to their 5-year-old son, Bradley, and said the boy would also take up boxing. When Bradley refused, his father hit him in the face. Susan put the children to bed and then tried to have a serious talk with her husband, urging him to seek help at a clinic. However, he became angry, grabbed his keys, and tried to leave. Susan attempted to stop him, which led to a struggle that caused injuries to her palms and wrists. According to Susan, her husband then struck her, causing her to fall and momentarily lose her bearings. After regaining composure, Susan saw her husband Jeffrey holding a knife, but her testimony became inconsistent. Her lawyer argued she was in a state of affect, leading her to seize the knife and strike Jeffrey. Susan claimed she secured him to a cart with ties and a belt after the confrontation, and candle wax accidentally landed on his body. However, the defendant had no explanation for why her underwear was found in the victim's mouth. In contrast, the prosecution presented a more convincing and logical case. Expert testimony revealed that the victim's wrist and ankle wounds were inflicted before death, likely as part of a ruse to restrain the victim. This also provided a plausible explanation for the gag in the victim's mouth. Additionally, the angle of the injuries suggested that the perpetrator was positioned on top of the victim rather than struggling with him, which would have resulted in different injury patterns. All the cuts on the victim were inflicted from the front, indicating that the attack occurred while he was lying on his back, unable to move. It was unclear whether Susan had planned her husband's murder in advance and intentionally used the pit he dug for a fountain as a makeshift grave. Prosecutors, however, suspected that she had carefully orchestrated the crime, motivated by the potential insurance payout. The case drew widespread media attention, with Susan being labeled the blue-eyed butcher or blonde meat grinder by the press. Jeffrey's family demanded the harshest possible sentence, while many of their neighbors felt sorry for Susan, recalling instances where she had bruises that she attributed to her own clumsiness, but which may have been signs of physical abuse. Prosecutors initially sought a life sentence for Susan, but later reduced their request to 45 years in prison. In March 2004, she was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years. She showed no emotion when the judge delivered the verdict, appearing detached from the proceedings. A year later, her lawyer's attempt to appeal the decision was rejected. In 2008, Susan and her defense team filed another appeal, which was influenced by new testimony from a previously unknown witness. Misty McKell, wife of former NFL champion Steve McHale, was a key witness. She had a lengthy relationship with Jeffrey Wright in the mid-1990s and was briefly engaged to him. However, she suffered physical abuse, humiliation, and cruel treatment from Jeffrey, leading her to end the engagement and cut ties. Following this new information in Jeffrey's testimony, Susan's prison sentence was reduced to 20 years. She became eligible for parole in 2014 at age 38, but was denied. A second denial followed in July 2017. After 16 years in prison, Susan Wright was released in the winter of 2020 at age 44. She was met by reporters and photographers, causing her to break down in tears and ask to be left alone. Her trial received extensive media coverage, including a broadcast on Court TV. Moving on to the next case. The case of Teresa Connell. James Connell was born on February 22, 1950, in Dayton, Ohio. He was the son of Ruth Slack and John Connolly. They had 4 additional daughters and 3 sons. The family was affluent. His grandfather, Fred Connolly, was a prosperous businessman and inventor who founded a company and held nearly 300 patents for innovations, including one of the first price-marking machines. Despite his success in business, little is known about James' early life. Nonetheless, it is evident that he chose a different career path. Rather than joining the family enterprise, he relocated to North Georgia, where he worked diligently to establish a successful company in the field of holistic medicine. James was assisted by Bonnie White, the company's accounting manager. In exchange for her work, James also provided chiropractic care to Bonnie's children and grandchildren. As Bonnie noted, James' kind and compassionate nature enabled him to cultivate a loyal clientele. Over time, the business expanded, and James recognized the necessity of hiring more employees. At that time, 21-year-old Teresa Connell applied for a position and was accepted. She would be responsible for welcoming visitors to the company. Teresa, who was from Harland, Kentucky, met James when she joined his company. Despite their 20-year age difference, they fell in love and began dating. After marrying in 1997, Teresa and her husband had their first son, Caleb, in 1996. They subsequently opened the Alpha Wellness Center in Dalton, Georgia. At the center, Teresa worked as a massage therapist, assisting people in achieving good health. As a friend of the couple, Bonnie observed their professional development. She stated that Teresa was a truly exceptional massage therapist. Their second child, Allison, was born in 2000. Soon thereafter, they moved into a spacious house in Ringgold, Georgia, located near the tennis courts. Their marriage was stable and happy, and the children were raised in comfort and love. Christmas was a particularly special time for Caleb, who immersed himself in the joy of the holiday season, surrounded by presents, a beautifully decorated tree, and the warmth of a fireplace. While reveling in the happiness of the moment, he imagined numerous ways to protect himself and, consequently, his loved ones. James secured a $500,000 life insurance policy from Tom Drew, naming Teresa as the sole beneficiary. He also insured their homes simultaneously. However, over time, their ideal life began to unravel due to mounting rumors of infidelity in their marriage. At Alpha Healthcare, these rumors eventually circulated among all staff. Regrettably, the situation deteriorated further because of the rumors of infidelity in James and Teresa's marriage, coupled with financial difficulties. James' health began to decline after contracting Lyme disease, leaving him unable to work. Meanwhile, Teresa underwent 4 surgeries and suffered a miscarriage, resulting in severe depression and substance abuse. Concurrently, Bonnie discovered that Teresa had been illegally embezzling money from the business. Within 1 month, Teresa herself had written 16 checks. When James confronted her about this in Bonnie's presence, his wife denied everything, asserting that the checks had been canceled. However, Bonnie, as the accountant, pointed out that canceled checks would not be processed through the bank, and she later produced a bank statement, placing Teresa in a difficult position. A rumor began circulating among the couple's staff, alleging that Teresa had secretly put lithium in James' coffee. James himself ultimately disclosed the rumor, rather than attempting to suppress the speculation. An investigation revealed that their relationship had deteriorated to the point where divorce was being contemplated, although the details remained unclear. By mid-2007, the family situation had become unstable. 2 cars had been repossessed, and James appeared visibly depressed. However, the announcement that he was about to be evicted for failing to pay the mortgage served as a wake-up call for the couple. Teresa devised a plan to address her marital, financial, and personal crises. The plan began with her pretending to be her husband and writing a letter to their agent, Tom Drew, stating that her husband had decided to end his life. Early on Friday morning, June 29, 2007, Teresa prepared to execute the remainder of her plan. During their usual breakfast, Teresa secretly added strong antidepressants to her husband's food. Meanwhile, she refused to eat, telling her husband that a friend named Robin would be picking her and the children up. She then took the children to a friend's house after James had ingested the medication. Teresa subsequently returned home to prepare for her trip. She quickly gathered what she deemed important items, including photographs of the children. Next, she ignited a fire between the office and the bedroom. Caleb and his sister were waiting in the car and observed their mother leave the house last. She lit a cigarette as she walked away. From the car, Caleb noticed smoke emanating from the house and became frightened. He warned his mother about the smoke, but she reassured him that it was merely burning papers and that there was nothing to worry about. Gary Carlock, a local grocery store owner, was on his way to work when he saw smoke coming from a house and promptly called emergency services. Fire crews arrived at the scene at 9:42 a.m. After assessing the situation, they determined that the fire could not be extinguished from the outside, so they decided to enter the house through the back door, which led directly to the bedroom. A firefighter examined the room and observed a disturbing image on their thermal imaging equipment, indicating the presence of a person. As they cautiously advanced through the smoke, they found the person kneeling by the bed, apparently praying. The person was unconscious, but did not appear to have sustained severe heat burns. However, their skin and clothing were heavily coated in smoke. Firefighters described the scene as typical of an arson fire. They initially identified the victim as James, 57, the homeowner, and quickly pronounced him dead. The raging fire destroyed everything, including potential DNA evidence or signs of foul play, leading police to initially suspect that the death was accidental. Police eventually reached James' wife, Teresa, by phone to report the incident, who was in Georgia at the time. When Teresa left town, she contacted her insurance agent just minutes later. Meanwhile, the children were devastated to hear the news about James, their beloved father. Although they had their own challenges, he had always demonstrated to them how important they were in his life. An extensive investigation was launched, but progress was slow due to a lack of leads. Teresa was interviewed by police that evening and recounted the events of that morning. She stated that she left the house at 8:15 a.m. and stopped at a restaurant on the way. Robin, Teresa's friend, was also questioned, and his account largely aligned with Teresa's, except that he claimed they left 30 minutes later at 8:45 a.m. The fire inspector determined that the fire originated at a point along the shared wall between the office and the bedroom where the victim was found. As officers continued searching the house, a trained dog was brought in to assist. The dog helped detect evidence of arson at the source of the fire, clearly indicating that it had been set deliberately rather than accidentally. On July 5, 2007, officers interviewed Teresa to reconstruct the events of that day. Teresa stated that she loved her husband deeply and attributed their financial difficulties solely to James' illness. She described their marriage as stable and dependable. Friends and colleagues of James confirmed that his declining health had forced him to stop working, causing difficulties for his business. At that time, Tom Drew reported to police that he had received a handwritten letter from James in which James expressed his intention to end his life. However, there were countless ways to do so, many much simpler and less painful. It was difficult to believe he would have chosen such a method. The medical examiner determined James' cause of death to be smoke inhalation, and toxicology tests revealed that he had been under the influence of strong antidepressants at the time of the fire. Burns on the soles of his feet indicated that he had attempted to put out the flames. Based on this evidence, forensic psychologist Sanji concluded that the death was the result of homicide. Police re-interviewed Robin, focusing on discrepancies between his account of events and Teresa's. Robin testified that after placing the children in the car, Teresa went back into the house and did not return for 15 to 20 minutes. The investigation led the team to a restaurant where Teresa and her children stopped for a snack. Security footage showed them arriving at 9:17 a.m. on the day of the fire. Since their home was only a 10-minute drive away, police suspected that Teresa might have been at home when the fire started. A closer examination of the timeline confirmed this theory, and police obtained a search warrant for Teresa Cannell's home. When they arrived, they discovered the family's personal belongings stored in the garage, as well as unfiled divorce papers. Further investigation uncovered 2 insurance policies, one for life and one for the home. As police focused on Teresa, they learned details about the loss of her youngest child and her subsequent drug addiction. From that point onward, based on the evidence collected, she was considered the prime suspect. During a subsequent interview, the couple's employees mentioned rumors of an affair, prompting police to call Teresa back. During her second interview with police, Teresa not only defended herself, but also began altering her story. According to Teresa, her husband James was a cruel madman, and she even claimed that, in her opinion, he was capable of starting the fire himself, even if it meant completely destroying the property. When questioned by the police, she recounted the morning of the incident. Teresa attempted to remember her morning routine. She stated that she and her husband usually woke up around 6:30 to 7 a.m. They typically spent this time together, either drinking coffee or chatting. However, she could not provide additional details, claiming that her actions were habitual. The drugs discovered in James' blood were the first matter the police wanted to address, so they began by asking Teresa about the medications her husband was taking. Initially, she listed them without difficulty, but when asked which specific drug had made James drowsy, she suddenly forgot the name. She then requested a moment to recall it. She attempted to remember the name, which began with a C, presumably C. Carville. However, when questioned about the insurance policy, which the police believed could be crucial to resolving the woman's motives, Teresa chose to minimize its importance, asserting that she did not even care to know the policy's value. It was evident that the investigation would be challenging, but Teresa persisted. The police then revealed another significant piece of information. An incendiary substance had been found at the crime scene, yet Teresa appeared to evade the issue once again. She defended her explanation by stating that her husband had painted the house a few days earlier, which could account for the presence of an incendiary substance. She also suggested that this substance might have caused or accelerated the fire. During the investigation, Teresa mentioned that she and her husband frequently drank coffee together every morning. The police found this suspicious, believing she could have exploited this opportunity to secretly administer sedatives to her husband. However, Teresa later stated that her husband had not had coffee with her in recent months. This statement directly contradicted her earlier claim, and the police immediately noted the inconsistency. Teresa even denied her own previous words, contradicting herself. At that stage, the police only possessed circumstantial evidence against her. One officer then suggested that she undergo a lie detector test, implying that she would do anything to prove she had not killed her husband. Before taking the test, Teresa was required to sign a written agreement stating that if the results indicated deception, the police could use the findings as evidence against her in court. As she prepared for the test, Teresa's concerns shifted from the original crime to a new fear, that a failed polygraph could be used against her. Before the polygraph test, she worried about the extent of information the police had, understanding that a false answer could severely damage her case. The results of the test showed that she exceeded the maximum lie detector threshold, suggesting she was likely concealing information. Based on the collected evidence, on July 9, 2007, Teresa, 34, was charged with premeditated murder and 2 counts of first-degree arson. Her attorney later argued that the fire prompting the charges was actually a joint plan between Teresa and her husband, intended to improve their financial situation. After Teresa's arrest, her children, Allison, 6, and Caleb, 11, were placed in the care of Georgia Children and Family Services. During an interview on July 16, Caleb displayed a remarkably high level of interest for his age. He told police what had occurred that morning, including his mother returning home while he and his sister were waiting in the car. Caleb also mentioned noticing smoke shortly afterward. He explained that his parents often burned trash in the backyard, which initially made the smoke appear normal. However, police stated that it was unlikely his mother would have chosen to burn trash just before leaving. Instead, they suspected she may have administered drugs to James that rendered him unconscious and then set fire to the bedroom while he remained in bed. Understandably, this situation was extremely difficult for the children. Nevertheless, despite the traumatic experience profoundly affecting their young minds, they remained resilient. Caleb's grandparents were subsequently able to obtain custody, and the court showed compassion by permitting Teresa to visit them. The police then shared evidence with Teresa, clarifying that her children could be called to testify against her. Initially, her defense team contacted the district attorney's office, requesting a plea deal. The deputy district attorney handling the case acknowledged that she had offered a fair and reasonable plea agreement, not wanting the children to endure such trauma. 2 days after the trial, Teresa accepted the plea deal. On the morning of December 10, 2010, a hearing was held. At the hearing, the judge asked Teresa if she would plead guilty to aggravated manslaughter, to which she responded affirmatively. Teresa later explained to the court that her actions were part of a financial scheme, but that she never intended to harm her husband. She requested leniency from the court. The court accepted her testimony and, consequently, granted her additional visitation time with her children. Additionally, Teresa Cannell was convicted of first-degree arson. The state dropped the premeditated murder charge as part of the plea agreement. Teresa was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 30 years. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.